Have you ever seen something happen and you just get that feeling deep in your gut? That feeling that you have to say something, to step in. Of course you have. It's a totally universal feeling, right? That moment when you just can't let something slide. Well, it turns out there's this kind of mental math we all do in those moments. So today, we're going to break down that calculation. When should you speak up? And, just as important, when is it actually better to just stay silent? Okay, picture this. You're waiting in line for your morning coffee, being all patient, and then someone just waltzes right past everyone, straight to the front. No excuse me, no apology, nothing. You feel that little flash of anger, don't you? Even if it only costs you like 30 extra seconds, something about it just feels so wrong. It drives us absolutely crazy. But why? Well, the word for that feeling, for that action is flagrant. It isn't just bad, it's obviously bad. It's so in-your-face wrong that it almost feels like it's demanding a response from you. It's an action that's just too bad to be ignored. And that right there, that's the heart of the problem. What do we do when we're faced with something so flagrantly wrong? This is where we get into something called the intervention calculus. It's basically the quick mental checklist we run through, whether we realize it or not, to decide if we're going to get involved. Because, let's be real, if we stepped in and said something about every little thing that bugged us, we would be exhausted all the time. So the very first step in this calculus is just figuring out the stakes. Like, does this actually involve you? When someone cuts you in line, that action has a direct consequence on your day. But what if you see it happen to the person in front of you? Well, then it doesn't directly affect you, but it might violate a principle you really care about, like fairness. And that's the key difference. That's when stepping in becomes a real choice, not just a gut reaction. So how do you make that choice? Well, for those situations that don't directly involve you, here's a really simple 3-point checklist. First, ask yourself, do I genuinely care about influencing this person's behavior? Second, is this a topic I'm actually passionate about, or am I just kind of annoyed in the moment? And finally, does this cross a line for me where I feel like I have to say something? The idea here is that if you can't give a firm yes to all three of those, then jumping in might not be the right move after all. But wait, let's say you check all the boxes. You're ready to act. Deciding to intervene is really only half the battle. Because even if you're sure you want to say something, there's another super important question you have to ask first. And that question is simple, but it is so crucial. Is the other person even capable of listening? Are they ready to hear you? Because if the answer is no, well, then your brave, principled stand is about to become nothing more than pointless noise. And this brings us to a huge distinction. You can have a productive dialogue if the person is at least somewhat level-headed and willing to consider what you're saying. But you're just creating noise. You're just making a scene if they're determined to reject everything out of hand. You know the type. They just fill the room with nonsense instead of actually having a conversation. And what happens when you ignore this is pretty powerful. Trying to reason with someone who just plain refuses to listen isn't noble. It's just pointless. As the source material puts it, it's as good as being silent with a hint of ignorance. I mean, just think about that for a second. You don't just fail to make your point, you might actually look foolish and make things worse. This is why, sometimes, the absolute smartest thing you can do. But this leads us to our final and maybe the most important idea of all. We've talked a lot about when not to speak, but we also have to look at the flip side. What's the real cost of our silence? I really want you to just sit with this for a moment. Sometimes the loudest thing in the room is the silence we're too afraid to hear. Wow. What that's suggesting is that our inaction, our choice not to speak up when we feel that pull, that can have its own powerful, echoing consequences. Consequences that maybe deep down we're trying not to hear. So, after all of this, after thinking about the calculus for when to step in and whether a real dialogue is even possible, the final question really comes back to you. It's about taking a hard look at your own life, at your own principles, and asking yourself, what is the silence that you've been too afraid to hear? And maybe more importantly, what is the silence that it's finally time for you to break?